I'll feed anybody, but I'm not for everybody. My name is Chef Derrick Green, and I find people that have turned their life's experiences into ingredients they use to feed others. We're redefining soul food. These people have turned their adversities into their advantages. This is the Sauce of Life show, and let's go.
Matt Buxton, welcome to the Sauce of Life. Brother, the Sauce of Life podcast is about people who've taken their life's experiences and turned those into ingredients that they use to now feed others. It's truly about what are the things that shaped you into the man that you are now. With that being said, welcome to the show. And Matt, introduce yourself to the world.
Hi, yeah, thank you. So I've done a lot of things in Alaska. Most of them are all media related. So I would call myself a journalist. Some people might not anymore. But I've been reporting and writing about Alaska politics and culture and businesses and local government for a lot of years now, since 2011. So I've been doing that. I currently write for the Alaska Current. I do my own newsletter called the Alaska Memo. I used to be at the Midnight Sun, which was kind of this blog thing. And then before that, I was at the Fairbanks Daily News Miner, which is the most sort of official of the print publication. So,
Wow. Were you born and raised in Alaska?
No. So that my whole journey here was like kind of like fortuitous, I think. In growing up, I had a lot of interest in Alaska that I didn't even really kind of piece together until I was here for several years. But in high school, I was really a big fan of Robert Service, did a lot of stuff on that, read a lot of books about Alaska. Then I went off to college in Nebraska. So I'm from Oregon originally, went off to college in Nebraska, which I thought was just going to be the most horrible experience but I got a scholarship there. So that's sort of what made me go. And honestly, like I applied for like 10 different colleges, a lot of them like liberal arts colleges on the coasts and all this sort of highfalutin journalism stuff. And I think the experience I got at Nebraska, I think really honestly shaped me into who I am, which was, I went to school in the middle 2000s. It was, I think I had a Ralph Nader shirt, for example. So like I was this like bleeding heart Portland liberal kid who really didn't have any like idea that the world was bigger than himself. And I went to Nebraska and I was expecting to run into all these like lunatic, gun wielding, everything that I had heard about that was awful about allegedly awful about Republican states. And lo and behold, I show up and, everybody just looks just like me. We all, politically, everybody turns out we agree on like 90 to 95% of things. And I think it kind of honestly set me on a path forward where, I think I think it really informed my reporting later on is that it was a really good understanding that we all, I think, agree on so much, and we frequently let ourselves get divided on really marginal issues, on things that are almost minimal to the experience of living your life in a happy and fulfilling way, and letting others do the same. And so much of it, I think we get sort of tied up in it. And so I went there and I love it. I'm still watch all the Husker games. Me and my partner have gone back to Nebraska several times, but yeah. So I had a professor there who had a connection up to Alaska, and I worked in Oregon after college. After graduating college, I had this I thought I was going to be. I thought I got an internship at the Oregonian, which is the paper in Portland. And for me, growing up in Oregon, I thought it was like going to be like a dream come true. People called the Oregonian this sort of the velvet coffin, right? Where people went to make a career and retire there, and it was just this awesome place to work. But in the late 2000s, there was this is 2010. The media landscape was really changing really rapidly, and I think people were really struggling to adapt to what that looked like. And so for me, that meant that like I was just sort of at the whim of whatever the Oregonian was doing. And so I think I had like 3 or 4 different beats. It's like the area of where I'm supposed to be reporting on. It kept on switching. I had like 3 different bosses while I was there. I just really had a hard time getting anything going. And it was, I think it was like a shock, right? And I think I was almost ready to walk away at that point in my life. But opportunity came up to go to Alaska, and cover state government and local politics. And I leapt at it, and I haven't looked back one time. As much to my parents' chagrin, I have not. I moved to Alaska with my car and everything I could fit into it in 2011, and haven't thought once about heading back down. So,
Man, you strike me as a determined individual. It sounds like, if I'm catching it right, it sounds like you've always had a penchant towards journalism or capturing stories.
Yeah.
What is it in journalism that appeals to you, and when, if you can recall, when did that start in your life?
So I think I have to honestly credit it to my Mexican background. I think a lot of my family on that side loves gossip. They absolutely love to gossip and tell stories, and everyone's in each other's business. But I think what I really like about it is that it's fun to know things. It's fun to know things, and it's fun to share things, right? And so rather than being a king of gossip, I really like journalism. And I think first in high school, actually, it was like I remember this story. Actually, I wanted to do photography this whole time, but it never really clicked. I think I felt like I couldn't tell my entire story with just a camera. And I found in high school, there was a story where it was some other school had vandalized something ahead of a big football game. And everybody was talking about what was going on. And I said, okay, well, I work I'm at the student paper. It's my, fifth period class. Let's go ask the principal what's going on. Let's go ask them, and we get the story. And I was able to know what the real story was. And then I was able to share that with everybody. And I think that really kind of kicked it off from there. I think it's sort of, desire to understand the bigger story about what's going on in our community or our world or whatever, and explain it to people. And not just explain it to people, but explain why it matters, why it's something worth caring about. I think for me, especially now when I do this newsletter and the blogging and all that sort of stuff, I really like to be able to break down big issues and be able to share them. And so, whether it's, for me now, it's like a lot of legislative hearings, and, redistricting was a big thing. So I was covering the court for several weeks, all that sort of stuff, and being able to take these sort of big complicated things and then break them down why you should care. It has been really a big motivating factor for me now in what I do.
Why should I care?
Because it's what's going on in our world, right? I think that's one of the things I was thinking about today while I was driving, right? Is that I was going to an interview, and I was thinking about how we do politics and messaging in our city now, right? Like for example, we have had all these pedestrian deaths, right? And a lot of very sad stories, and some of the questions I think of are like, how do we make that safer for everybody? Well, one of the things that's sort of difficult too is that we're all so sort of disconnected now. Like, we're not all watching the same TV stations. If we're not listening to the same radio stations. We're not even really connecting on the internet in the same way anymore. There's all these little tiny small communities, and I think it kind of can make it so you feel like your world is sort of small, or your world is really homogeneous, and it's very homogenous, and it's very you just are around the people that you like and you agree with. And so I think it's important to understand what's going on in the community in a bigger sense, and that's sort of where reporters, I think, come in, right? We're trying to help bridge and connect those stories. And right, like my newsletter, has like 2,500, 3,000, 3,500 readers. So it's not, it's not even all of Anchorage by any means. It's not even my neighborhood by any means. But I like to think that some of those things can help begin to bring some of that community back. And so I think, understand what's going on in your community, right? Like I think for, I live over in East Anchorage near Waffles and whatnot. And for me, some of those questions of like, why are our roads more dangerous than other roads? Why is there big chunks of sidewalk, or big chunks of like path between schools? Why doesn't it have sidewalks? Why do that sort of stuff? And understanding that also helps us get to, well, what can we do about it? Right. It's not just enough to say that our roads are bad, but to understand, the planning, the the uneven, sometimes, frankly racist or classist sort of application of our tax dollars. I think challenging that and understanding that is how we start to break through it and how we start to make our community better. And I think that, to me, is really what's so important. I think we talk a lot about journalists, the need of a journalist to be unbiased and objective and to kind of be this like dead-eye news robot. And I think that one of the things that I think journalists especially, and I think people and consumers of media need to remember, is that for the most part, most local journalists are members of the community, right? Like I have a bias, right? Like I'm extremely biased because I want Anchorage to be the best place it can be. I want our community to have more opportunities. I look at, I think I sit my house is on a path to between a bunch of low income housing and an elementary school, and I think about every day those little kids. Like those little kids all really matter to me, even though I don't know any of them. I really want them to be able to be safe on the way to school. I want to be sure that the school that they're going to is good. And I think that that to me is one of the things that over this entire span of my career has been really I think came out more clearly. I think is it that we really we have biases, but sometimes those are good, and that we are all trying to fight for the same thing, which is a good quality of life for everybody in our community.
Man, I would think that a bias, in the sense of the way that you're saying it, a bias is a healthy thing because it's actually helping you to improve your community. It sounds like you're a person who feels responsible for the environment in which you live and the community in which you live. Has that always been something like a part of your life where you felt responsible for the people around you or the information around you? And I'm hearing you mentioning silos and how now with all of these individualized media sources, essentially, you can exist in a silo and maybe you don't have the full story.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know the full truth. And unfortunately, it feels like we live in a world where people are more and more comfortable existing in ignorance. Like, how does that impact you?
Oh, that's a lot there to unpack. So first, I think I don't know if I always felt really that strong sense of community in and responsibility in my reporting. And I think it kind of shows. I think if you look back on some of my early stuff, especially when I was a student journalist, especially in those early years, is that I think I'm gonna be honest. I was pretty into myself, right? I had a pretty high attitude of like how good I was at journalism and how good of a photographer I was. And I think the real world kind of punched me in the mouth, right? Like I was a real big wake up call to realize that I wasn't the center of the universe. As far as figuring out kind of where my responsibility to it, I think back to a few moments. I remember going to, there's it's like a journalist think tank, I guess is the best way to put it, but it's called Pointer Institute. It's in Tampa Bay or St. Petersburg, excuse me. And it's sort of like this pinnacle of journalism thought, I guess is maybe the best way to put it. And I got to go there in college as there's like a journalist boot camp sort of thing. And one of the really interesting professors, Al Tompkins, he's legend in journalism, really kind of pushed us to think about the biases that we have. I think it was a conversation that we were having about whether or not it's ethical to put a photo into black and white because it made it more dramatic. And I think that what he basically, there was this long exercise that, but the sort of the core message is that we all have biases. We all have a learned, lived life experience that affects how we view the world and how we approach the world that may be invisible to us, but it's going to affect us in one way or another. And so his point of view was that we should at least understand that what biases we do have, and then allow that to either inform our reporting or kind of guard against it negatively affecting it. So you can feel strongly about something, but as a journalist, taking the time to hear that other side of the story or understand it allows you to cover it in a fair and kind of clear-eyed manner. And I think too, that approach is much more valuable to me than this sort of like fake objectivity. Sometimes you'll see there are, and I think that maybe one of his lines is sometimes there are things that are just wrong in this world, right? Like you don't need necessarily, if you're doing a story on feeding hungry kids, you don't need to go out and necessarily find somebody who doesn't think it's important to feed hungry kids for the, quote unquote balance in the story. And so I think it was sort of empowering, honestly, to understand that we aren't supposed to be these, or it's really truly impossible. It's a myth that we can be this totally dead-eyed news robot. That we're gonna have life experiences that affect it. And so, as far as that applies to the siloed effect, I think that I think that's like that's the $1 million question, right? Is like, how do we bring back some of the community and civility and connection that we've lost in this era? And I think that, some of that is so tough to answer. But I think one of the things to me is that we need to find, as a media source, we need to be better at including more voices into our reporting. I think that so frequently, I know I'm definitely guilty of this when I cover the assembly a lot, the state legislature. So frequently my main sources are assembly members and state legislators and people that are kind of all in that orbit. And sure, those are the people making the shots, but those people aren't really necessarily talking to everyone, right? They are frequently can be very wildly out of touch with their communities. And so I think, taking that upon ourselves to reach out and include more voices. And, I think that makes our coverage more rich, but it also invites more people to, to consume and to look at the coverage, because, it's like, I think, for example, you look at, there's so many different communities in Anchorage, and it's so diverse and so vibrant. But if you were to look at a lot of the media, you'd think that Anchorage is pretty white, right? And there are parts of it that certainly are, but we have the high school that has the most spoken languages in the country in it, and we have so much diversity and so much culture here that is kind of invisible to the sort of mainstream elements. And I think it kind of, as somebody in like the Samoan community or something like that, like, what reason do you have to necessarily read something about a bunch of white people living in South Anchorage, right? Like that, the media representation, all that sort of stuff needs to be better at reflecting the community that it's a part of. And I think it's when we are missing that, when people are not feeling heard, that really that plays into the silo nature of our modern world right now. Also, I think people are busy, people are stressed out. I think that sometimes the news can feel so frequently just like this deep pit of sadness and stress. And I think that that trying to do more reporting on a community when it's not in a horrible situation is important too. I think, I think back to my time working in Fairbanks at the News Miner there. There were times, there was a time where there was a horrible tragedy in a rural community. And for some of the reporters that were going out there, it was the very first time that anybody from that organization had ever set foot in that community. But for the News Miner, they had, we had tried to actually make it out to villages ahead of time, just to do other stories, to try to connect to the community in a non sort of, and we call it parachuting in. You'll see it a lot with like national news organizations. So we tried not to do that. And I think that was so important. So I think in that element, that horrible tragedy case, we had a reporter landing who had been there before, who had known some of the people, who knew who to ask and who not to ask. And I think that makes it much better. And I think, it's like just so important. It's about building those relationships and kind of working past some of those blockades to make it difficult to connect.
I agree with you, man. It almost feels like, well, it doesn't almost feel like, it feels like it's all by design. And I agree that the way that the media portrays Alaska, you'd think that you're going to get raped walking down the street at any given moment, or you're going to get assaulted by some drunk person, or it's just, the way that they talk about, our domestic violence rates, our sexual assault rates, or the suicide rates, you'd expect people to be jumping off the roof of the mall. And granted, those stats actually matter, but they rarely include that it's per capita versus, just in mass, thinking that it happens this way. But you said something that I want to go back to. You're talking about you had a realization in your life that you weren't the center of the universe. That I'm curious where that confidence came from in the early beginning, that self-centeredness. And I'm not saying it in a bad way, because one of the things that I admire about you is that from very early on, you knew what you wanted in life, and you seem to be in pursuit of that and living in that. And as a man who gets to live in his dream every day, when I encounter someone else who had a vision for their life or their purpose and they live in it, I'm impressed by that. Where does that come from, that confidence, or you being the center of the universe, or thinking that you were?
I mean, I think it really was because I lacked any idea of what I wanted or what the universe was, or like what the world could be, right? Like I think back to my time growing up, and I think it's interesting. Like I just have so many relationships, just friendships and even romantic relationships where it feels like I wasn't even present at the time. That it was like these years were a blur to me. And I think a lot of it goes back to the fact that I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Excuse me. I didn't know what I was doing. And I think that I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know who I was, but I just figured that I was good at whatever it was, I was good at it. I was doing a good job, but I think I didn't really have a good sense of what I wanted to do in life. I just know I wanted to be doing something and be thought to be a good at it, right? And I think so for me, and it was so weird. I mean, I look back at my young adulthood and kind of baffled, in a way, because for me, writing was the hardest thing for me to do in school. It was so challenging. I was not good at it. I was much better at math and science, but the problem was that I went to a school with a lot of really good math and science kids. So I was maybe the top 5 or whatever in math and science. But to me, the fact that there was 4 more people above me was I don't want to do that. I don't want to. No, thank you. And so for some reason, I wanted the challenge, I think. And so, I went to school for photography, and then partway through, I just kind of got sidetracked and got into writing. And I think for me, it was almost natural. It was really, looking back on it, was natural in a way, because I think what I wanted to be was a storyteller. I wanted to, and I think it kind of came from a long family. All my family they have all these stories, that are well remembered and told and evolve, and all this sort of there's such a mythos in my family on both sides of it, of all this sort of stuff. And I think I kind of wanted to continue that in some way. But I think I was going about it wrong for a long time. For me, I was trying to do it with a camera. I was trying to tell stories with a camera. And so much of it, so much of my great time, if I was trying to tell this story of our conversation, there's not many pictures of it that are that interesting, or being able to sit down and write it through and kind of get on those ideas somehow connected more to me. And I think I kind of eventually, there was a part of me in my head that it was pulling me in one direction, and everything kind of ended up luckily falling in line, or eventually working out, with my career in Alaska. But I don't think I knew what I wanted. And I think that was sort of where this idea of I had it all figured out, and I was the center of the universe. But it was because I think I had no idea what the universe was, or what the world was, or what it could be, right? And I think a lot of us struggle with that, right? And I think we all struggle too with the push-pull of what we really want in our heart, and what the world around us tells us that we should want, right? I think that there's tens of thousands of millions of dollars in credit card debt that attest to that, right? Around the world, around our country, right, and our community, of people living something that they are not, or cannot afford. And I think that I think there's a lot of pressure to do that. And I think for me, as a younger man, I definitely had I felt a very strong pressure to be a certain way or do a certain thing. And for me, I mean, probably my biggest humbling, life experience is really finding my current partner. My partner Chanda, we've been together for a while now, and we own a house together and all that sort of stuff. I think for me, it helped me realize that the thing I wanted was to be happy, to be content, and to have a family and have a space that we can call our own. And I think that, looking back, it all makes perfect sense. My family's very strong. We were very close growing up. We, always did things together. We had kind of, this idea, we were always happy kind of regardless of what kind of money was coming in or whatever. We always found some way to have fun and that sort of stuff. And so I think that like it wasn't really until I found my family, my new family up here, that it really started to click and to build
Did that cause any
around. And I think
issues with
that's
your
really
family?
no, that's all. That's actually really good. They're all very happy. Yeah, I think they would just like to see as many a mother would. When are the grandchildren coming? And I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm
you
not in
don't
any
matter
hurry.
anymore.
But yeah. But I think that I think that where my strong feeling of community came from, because I think I moved around a lot as a little kid, and then I moved around a lot as a young adult, and I think I was sort of reluctant to feel like I was ever putting roots down anywhere, because I always felt like, oh, the next hot job or cute girl was just around the corner, and I can't be too invested in this spot. And I think that my relationship now, and just being more mature and sore and tired most of the time, I feel much more rooted to where I live now, and I think rooted to the community that I'm in. And I think that it's that sort of connection has really helped drive and inform almost everything now. So yeah.
Do you feel you have a pretty good grasp on you mentioned the word rooted a couple times. Do you feel that you have a pretty good grasp on the community, more so than the politicians that you mentioned earlier, who at times are disconnected because they exist in silos in and of themselves?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I think the thing is we could always be better, right? We could always be more wide open and aware of our community. But I think at the very least, I know I'm not lying to myself that I'm doing a perfect job covering it. There's always going to be a better way and more inclusive way to cover things. But honestly, the last year, especially, some of the reporting with the current and everything like that has been more kind of flowing into understanding some of the systemic sort of inequities in our community, and then sort of knowing and meeting with the communities that are on the short end of the stick, I guess, for lack of a better word, is been really important. I think that we can always do better, but yeah, I think I'm getting better. I wouldn't say I'm well beyond thinking I'm an expert on everything, but yeah.
Do you view it as this perfection thing? First of all, I don't. Well, let me not inject my thoughts on that.
Sure.
Is it a destination or is it a journey?
Oh, it is a journey all the time. I think that's the thing. One of the things I like to, I always joke. I'm sure it will surprise you that as a young man, I was not the most clean with my space, right? Like my office is big mess all the time. But I think there was some part of me that it was under the thinking that, like, for example, you could just clean up your house a whole bunch and then you wouldn't have to do it ever again, right? This idea that life, adulthood, is really like a constant set of maintenance of like chores and tasks that we have to do. And I think that what really helped me is I think I remember talking to somebody about finding the zen in it. The zen, and I think it was in cleaning specifically, is finding the zen in these sort of things that we're going to have to do for the rest of our lives in a way, and find a way to make it easier, and find a way to make it more kind of enjoyable in a way. And I think that's like that when that idea was given to me, I think it helped me really like recontextualize much of my life, where it is, you know, it is not enough to say that, oh, I wrote a really good story one time, or I did this really great project a couple years ago, and that's the end all be all story. You know, it's like, reporting is a constant churn of stuff where we are always trying to be better. We're trying to um, do it with more understanding or more connection or more clarity all the time. And I think for me that is so true. And I think, I mean, even talking about it now, I'm thinking about like things that I could be doing better with my work, or building the stronger habits around my freelance stuff, getting my stuff in on time, for example. All that sort of stuff is, I think it would be I think it'd be a shame, right, if we could we could do it once and we were perfect and we never have to do it again. I think that would be, I think that's like, I think we're always able and capable of doing something in a better, or at least even a different, more interesting way. And I think
Do you look
that's sort of
at
the fun, is finding that.
do you look at communication as a an art form, or is it more like a science? Because, well, I'll just let you answer that.
Oh, that is heavy. A little, I mean, I think a little bit of both, right? I think that the way people communicate has obviously rapidly changed a lot, right? Where we no, most people, I'm guessing, are probably not getting the daily newspaper anymore, or even watching the daily news or something like that. But at the same time, I think that like there are things about it that do remain the same. I think that do are sort of those constants that are less of the art form and more of the science, where it's like, yeah, people want straightforward, easy to understand, and contextualization that at least makes them answers the question, or at least poses the question of why something should matter to somebody. And I think so. There's elements of like, I think about journalism. There's so many different ways to deliver it now, where this idea of the inverted paragraph is sort of, it's a little bit outdated, but at the same time, it might not automatically like apply to a TikTok news video or a tweet or an Instagram post or something like that. But I think that some of those like ideas uh of of like getting, sort of the important things early on in your stuff, is that still I think that still holds true. So there are elements of both, I would say. But I think I definitely like the artistry of it more.
Okay, man. As an artist, then as a wordsmith, it's like you get to shape your bias. How much you mentioned your biases before? How much is that controlled or uncontrolled as you're telling these stories and shaping the stories?
Yeah.
How much does that have to play in it?
Yeah, it goes back and forth. So, I was a like straight news reporter for the News Miner for 6.5, 7 years. And there, for me, that was, that I had my biases, but I kept them out of my stories. And I think that was, that was reflected by trying to get out all, voices from different sides. That was in the language that I would use. But I think I went independent and bloggery and independent contractor and freelancer, all those sort of things in 2017. I think I felt kind of strongly about how the election had turned out in 2016. And I sort of felt like I wanted to be a little more active, I think, in being able to shape our world, right? And really, I think one of the things that's difficult as a reporter is that you do see things out there that, that are wrong or are right. There are things that I think even an objective person can look at and say, that's not how it should be. And so, again, I think almost back to trying to tell stories with a camera, it was like I was finding that it was hard to tell the stories with the traditional tool set. And so for me now, being able to be a little more biased, or more, I have more of my own personal voice in my reporting. for me, I'm able to take that next step and to be a little more direct with why something matters or why something's good or bad, right? I think, for example, I think a lot of reporting in the last like 6 years of doing this, where it's just looking at stuff that is wrong or is weird in the community and being able to explicitly say that rather than trying to like hint at it. So I think that's sort of the problem, is that I think a lot of journalists come from this kind of like a liberal arts background, where the idea is that, if you give everybody all the information and that everybody would come to the same conclusion, right? If you just give everyone if you give everybody and made them sit down and read the Affordable Care Act, of course everyone's going to support it, right? Or something like that. I think that it really misses the fact that I think people don't have the time to be digesting these huge amounts of news stories, but also I think that people really can benefit from having a voice talk through why something matters or why something is difficult. So for me, one of the stories that really affected me during the pandemic was there was they held a by-mail election that year, and there was a massive amount of ballots that were rejected. And they were rejected because there was like a witness signature requirement on the ballots, I think. And for whatever reason, communities where English wasn't spoken as much were the ones that were having their ballots rejected on a higher rate. And I think it speaks to, it was also during the middle of the pandemic, so maybe finding someone to notarize it was difficult. Maybe the language barrier of understanding the directions was difficult, that sort of stuff. And to me, like seeing 30% of ballot rejections, that's a bad thing, right? And being able to say that's a bad thing, and also to not allow the Division of Elections or other politicians to say, oh, it's not that big of a deal. No, it is a big deal. It's a big deal because we're humans and we should, be supportive of people voting and being able to cast their vote and participate in the democratic process. And so,
Well, see, that's an opinion. That's an opinion.
So it's an opinion, right?
There's others that will say they don't speak English. I've literally heard that. Well, they don't speak English and they're living in America, so they shouldn't be able to vote. And it's like, what?
Oh no! I mean, it's like that I think is so. I think that to me is so frustrating, right? Is that I think that there's so much of these sort of like broad, sort of cold attitudes that we have towards each other sometimes, like that. And I think that, it's like it totally too, like this sort of, like, oh, this get out of your country thing, get out of our country, go back home sort of thing. It's just so, I think it really forgets about what America is. It's supposed to be a land of opportunity, right? And like, who are you to be trying to figure out like if someone's legal status or not? Like it really shouldn't be an individual question another person. And I think that anyway. So
I think it's hilarious. So I had a restaurant last year that I had to shut down in Florida for various reasons, and legally I'm not allowed to truly go into the reasons that it shut down.
Sure.
But one of the things that stuck out to me most was this demographic of people that did not want me in their town, in their city. And this guy comes and says, "Go back where you came from." And I said, "I'm from Florida. Where are you from?" Like, I'm in Florida. I am back where I came from after 21 years in military service.
Yeah.
And it turns out he's from a different state. Now he's in Florida telling me to go back where I came from. Yeah. And it's like, how do you not realize the idiocy of what just came out of your mouth?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the thing. There's so much. And that, I think, is part of why I like the fact that I'm an independent reporter now and I can do this sort of stuff. And I think that's, I definitely bristle sometimes because I think I get lumped in or even like kind of held at arm's length by other traditional media, but that's fine. It's whatever. But I think that it's sort of very frustrating when you see so much of this sort of divisiveness and hate and whatever ignorance really go unchecked in out there. And I think being able to call it out is so important. I think that, you listen to a lot of these politicians say dumb, uninformed, cruel, things out there, and for them to be able to be treated like seriously or be treated as if their opinions are valid, I think is very damaging. And I think that it kind of normalizes that behavior too, and it feeds into it, because it's like, like, there's community condemnation was and should be an important element of this stuff. Like, you act like a jerk, you should be treated, and so anyways, I think that especially in the world of politics, I think that for me, after listening to legislators talk for like 6 or 7 years at the paper, for me, it was eventually I had to be able to move to something where I was able to call them out. I think I can. People people who follow my work know that I have a very low opinion of our governor, for example. That I've been very critical of him and his administration, and it's not. And I think the thing is that it's important, for at least for me as a reporter, is it really isn't about political affiliation. Like, I couldn't care less about whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent or anything like that. I think that like, even though I can get labeled as a progressive reporter or a journalist, to me, I would love to see a conservative government that was run well, as long as it is sort of delivering on the fundamental purpose of government by and for the people. Cool, right? Like, I feel it could be a good managers, good stewards of of the money, of the public trust, of all these sort of public infrastructure and systems. But so frequently we see it not deliver on that. It's this idea of the conservative leadership we've had, especially in Alaska. I don't need to get into it too much, but you see a lot of it is like, we're here from the government. We're here to make sure it doesn't work right. There's sort of, there's nightmarish stories from, the building permit offices, and snow plowing in Anchorage is really another good example where the services aren't being delivered. And I think, to me, that is what I hate the most, is a government that isn't functioning for the people, or is functioning but only for a few people. That's even more, that is sort of unfair and unequal, and reinforcing historic inequities and injustices. Like, we need to be, again, and for me, it goes back to, I want Anchorage to be the best place to live in, and that is a place with good schools, with good roads, where it's safe to walk places. Those are things that are important to me. And when those issues land on like political lines, it's almost immaterial to it. Like, to me, it's, can you deliver on those? And sometimes it's just, some political sides are better at it than others, and we'll, but the thing is that, that's I could go down so many different roads on it, but yeah, it's all to say, again, it just comes back to this fact that I really, really like believe strongly that we as journalists have a responsibility to our community, because we are a part of our community. We are.
Well, here's a question for you then. Oh, dude, I'm looking at the time and I'm like, we're already at 45 minutes almost. Holy crap.
I'm good at rambling. You can cut some of it out, I'm sure.
No. So the question becomes then this. First, I don't cut people's interviews, rarely, unless there's something that they just say, hey, that's not what I meant. This truly is about the sauce of life. It's truly about your words, your opinion, your views. And if it's like, there are channels, there's ways for people to hear my views on everything. This is about people learning about Matt. Question though, this question that I get asked often, which is, if you see so many problems, why aren't you running for office? Especially you as an independent investigative reporter. So, oh yeah, go there.
Yeah. This is a question I've dealt with or thought about a lot, right? Like, I do think that there are times where it sounds interesting. If I'm going to be, I'll be honest, right? Like, but again, I think it kind of goes a little back to that ego thing where it sounds good when I'm also the center of the universe, right? Which I'm not. And I think for me, I think that, oh gosh, I think honestly, I don't know if I'm tough enough to subject myself to that level of scrutiny and also
Mm.
stress. Like I think that I covered the legislative session in person for 4 or 5 years. So I was down in Juneau, away from home, for 3 months of the year, and it's tough. I think that's one of the things that um, is really important to understand if you're running for the legislature in Alaska, is that being in Juneau for that amount of time is no joke. And I think too that the other thing that is so tough about it is that it's also like at the worst time of year. It's like from January to April. And
Yes.
so not only is that 3 months, is like the 3 months I feel is like the perfect amount of time for some place to start to feel like home. And it's also in Juneau is about the time where the weather's getting nice too. And I think the other thing, if I'm going to be really honest here, is that there's too much drinking in Juneau. I think that the session, so much of the legislative session and Alaska politics in Juneau really revolves around bars, at least when I was there, and drinking to excess. And there have been problems from that scene that I think for me was too much. And honestly, like, so a lot of people think I'm in Juneau when I cover from the legislative session, but I actually stay in Anchorage. I cover it from home. There's live streams and all that sort of stuff. But for me, I do that because Juneau stresses me out. That sort of Juneau session time stresses me out. And B, I think I also get distracted, if I'm being honest, being down there. Like for here, I can sort of I have like a big computer screen with Battle Station, put multiple meetings up. I can record record everything. I can talk on the phone. I can tweet, make videos, and all that sort of stuff from here. It's much more easy. But I think for me, it's just I just have a hard time with the sort of social element of it, and being away from home, being away from the dogs. So I think too. I think being a politician. I think it's tough. I think it's tough because you have to, again, if you're going down to Juneau, you're just one of 60 people down there. And then the governor can veto things. And I think for me, the way I can kind of perpetuate and effectuate the most good is through what I'm doing here.
Is that the legacy that you're hoping to leave? Or what is the legacy? What?
Oh, I mean,
Like,
I think I'd love to write the next great American novel, right? I think,
really?
honestly, I think that, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I think for me, as I get older, some of the career things are almost less important than the relationships that I have. So, I think, my own personal life has been more and more important to me, as well as, having a strong relationship with my readers and that sort of stuff. So it's almost, and a relationship isn't something you can necessarily put on a shelf, right? And frame and get big awards for. But I think that like having a relationship with my readers that informs them and keeps them informed is really important. I think one day I'll find some time and energy and creativity to sit down and write a novel or a book about Alaska. But for right now, I think just being able
to about that, writing the next great American novel.
I mean, I mean, we would all writers would love to do that. But I think one of the things it is challenging about this job, and this is something I've definitely struggled with this year, especially, is that there's only, like, I find with creative outlets, there's only so much energy that we have for that. So, 13, 14 years of writing about Alaska has made me pretty tired. So
yeah,
this year has been more of a slump than most, if I'm being honest. But I've also done some of my favorite stories this year in a way too, where like, going out and talking to you and talking about waffles and whatnot, what you guys are doing with your employees and your support and your backstory and all that sort of stuff. That was a breath of fresh air for me in that sort of stuff. And I think honestly, like, I guess and now that I'm actually talking, I've talked enough and sort of filibustered it here, is that I think what I would really like, the legacy, if anything, is I would love to see an Alaska that is more equitable, more with more justice, with more opportunity for everyone. And I think that for me, being able to highlight the people that are working toward that, support them in a way to even like be able to float ideas and get things that might not be getting attention in front of more people, that would be good, right? Like I think about minimum wage, paid leave, school funding, all those sort of things. I'm not going to be the person that will pass them, but if I could be the person who at least helps drum up attention and energy and helps people understand why those things are important, I think that would be a really nice thing to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brother, I have 2 questions remaining for you. One, where can people find you and on social media or wherever you want them to access you?
Sure. So I usually during the legislative session, at least, and kind of election season, mostly on Twitter, I guess /X now. My handle there is at Matt Buxton. It's MattBuxton. And you can also find my personal newsletter. That's at akmemo.com. It's a Substack newsletter. So there's like free editions and there's subscriber editions, and mostly get everything there. And then I also work at the alaskacurrent.com, which is a kind of alt-weekly sort of style news. I think it's called a writers collective. So there's several writers there. We're all kind of covering our little corners of the world there. So yeah.
Okay.
That's about it. Yeah. You can find me those places. I also occasionally do my own podcast with my friend from Juneau. We haven't maybe recorded in maybe like 5 or 6 months now, but we will get back to it when it's probably soon. The elections and the legislative sessions right around the corner. So that's Hello Alaska.
Okay.
Yep.
And then final question before we wrap this up. Actually, you're going to wrap it up. Final question, which is, Matt Buxton, if this were the only time that you and I spoke, or the final time that you and I spoke, or the only time that the listeners or the watchers of this podcast saw or heard you speak, what would you want us to walk away with?
Be kind, and give each other grace. I think that we are all going through so much, and to be able to give each other grace, whether that is through our daily interactions, whether that's through the policies we are passing, through this big thing, we need to give each other a bit of more of a break. I think a bit more of understanding, a bit more patience, a bit more kindness, like a bit more humility too. So,
okay. Yeah. There you go. I literally have a t-shirt that says "Be kind."
Yeah.
Matt Buxton, I appreciate your time, brother. Thank you for joining the Sauce of Life. And I hope you have an amazing continuance of your journey.
Thank you so much.